Dorothy's ruby slippers might be the most famous shoes in the world. In the final moments of the classic 1939 film that bears his name, The Wizard of Oz sorts out almost everyone. The lion gets his medal, the scarecrow gets his diploma, the Tin Man gets his ticking heart. But for poor Dorothy, stranded far from home, he has nothing. Suddenly, a glowing golden orb drifts into view. From inside, the glittering good witch of the north emerges. Glinda explains to the little girl from Kansas that she's always had the power to go home. Just tap your heels together 3 times and repeat to yourself, there's no place like home. With the planet on the brink of World War II, a magical solution to a difficult problem held electric appeal, the perfect deus ex machina. It remains to this day one of the most famous scenes in cinema, a testament to the enduring power of an ancient plot device. The dictionary tells us that deus ex machina, literally God from the machine, is a person or thing that appears suddenly and unexpectedly and provides solutions to apparently insoluble problems. Its origins lie in Greek theater. Think of Apollo and his golden chariot in that final scene in Orestes, where the god appears magically on the stage, hoisted by crane, and summarily ties up all of the playwright's loose ends. Helen is set among the stars, Orestes is ordered to come here to Athens to stand trial, and weddings are foretold for Hermione and Electra. Instant order from chaos. The concept, of course, is as old as the gods themselves, who throughout our collective history have come down from the sky to move among us, endeavoring to set things right. Indeed, the idea of God taking physical form to intervene on our behalf is one of the great leitmotifs of world religion. It is a familiar story that highlights the key ingredient of deus ex machina, physical presence. This vision of deus ex machina perfectly captures the spirit of our work at the IDA, where making objects that transform the trajectories of public narratives suddenly and unexpectedly appear is our specialty. My own introduction to the talismanic power of physical presence came on a hot August afternoon in August of 2015. For months, the news had been filled with images of sledgehammer-wielding ISIS extremists standing among the shattered remains of heritage sites. This was part of a campaign of cultural cleansing that at the time threatened to spill widely into the Middle East. Should the world stand by while terrorists rewrite history? As the director of a well-known heritage conservation organization, I was asked by the Times to write an op-ed piece on that very topic. At some point, an editor asked what I suppose was an obvious question. He said, "Isn't it too late for many Syrian sites?" Without hesitation, I replied, "Give me 6 weeks and I can rebuild any of the lost objects, even great monuments like Palmyra's Triumphal Arch." "Sure," I said, "why not?" And with those words, my life and the lives of millions of other people in ways, great and small, were transformed. You know, sometimes you say crazy things and nobody pays attention. This was not one of those occasions. The next morning, instead of a quiet op-ed buried deep in the paper somewhere, I awoke to a cover story in the Times with 3 pages of diagrams and charts and photos explaining in detail how I was going to rebuild Syria's lost architecture. My plan was the lead story on the BBC World Service that day and at hundreds of other news outlets in the days that followed. It seems that even threatening to use the IDA's Euripidean crane to hoist a 15-ton stone arch smack dab in the center of a global controversy was enough to capture the world's attention. How I and my incredible partner, Oxford's Dr. Alexei Karanovska, secured 15 tons of rare Egyptian marble, trucked it overland through a hostile country, and then, having created a superb 3D model from thousands of crowdsourced images, convinced our friends at Torart to help us create a duplicate Triumphal Arch, Palmyra's most famous landmark, shipped it all to England, and erected it on Trafalgar Square, all within 56 days, are things I need not recount in detail here today. The point is this: we did it and the world came to watch. When my old Oxford classmate Boris Johnson and I unveiled the arch on April 19th, 2016, it was under the watchful gaze of 231 credentialed media sources, everyone from CNN to TASS. It was a total, Boris later assured me, he would never again match in public office. And by God, our Deus Ex Machina, our stone arch that suddenly and unexpectedly appeared on Trafalgar Square, packed as much punch as Apollo and his golden chariot in Orestes. Within weeks, the reconstructed arch won support from government, financial, and cultural leaders around the globe. The heads of UNESCO and the IMF gathered under the arch, pledging and later providing massive aid for Syrian reconstruction. Suddenly, the project was a juggernaut. I spoke at the United Nations alongside the presidents of both the Security Council and the General Assembly, after which the UN passed the most sweeping condemnation of the Assad regime ever adopted by that body. The New York Times named the arch Public Artwork of the Year. It was the centerpiece of the G7 conference in Florence. But the arch's most memorable trip may have been to Washington, D.C., where it stood in front of the U.S. Capitol at the invitation of a bipartisan group of congressmen. The Republican and Democratic leaders of the House Foreign Affairs Committee spoke movingly under the arch. In the weeks that followed, Congress approved 2 unprecedented Syria aid bills, ultimately providing more than $20 billion of humanitarian assistance to millions of people across Syria. After years of international indecision and inaction around the tragedy of the Syrian civil war, the massive presence of Palmyra's reborn arch, craned into place before audiences on 3 continents, 15 million people in person, and many millions more via media sources, had harnessed the power of men, women, nations, and great public institutions. Its imposing weight and proportions made the inadequacy of mere talk painfully apparent. It cast a long shadow, demanding action, concrete solutions to seemingly insoluble problems. And somehow it found them. Defining the unique power of Deus Ex Machina has for thousands of years depended upon whom you asked. Aristotle was a huge fan. In Poetics, he took the view that it was only fair to let the gods clean up the messes they helped create. But Aristophanes, Euripides' contemporary and sometimes his critic, chided his colleague for an over-reliance on a plot device that, as he saw it, amounted to an abdication of the playwright's burden. It let the author off the hook, making his character's problems somebody else's responsibilities, an insult to the audience, in Aristophanes' words. 2 millennia later, Pope Benedict echoed Aristophanes' view. Benedict also called the Deus Ex Machina an insult, because he said it is a lie. Each of us, he explained, knows we must choose and we must act, for better or worse, to determine the course of our lives. God does not move among us as a Deus Ex Machina to set everything in order, Benedict said, but rather to extend by his example the capacities of human beings so that we can find room for the presence of God and act as we believe he might. In short, the Deus Ex Machina is inspiration to do better, physical evidence of something better to which we might aspire, the Deus within us. As Clinda said, Dorothy had always possessed the power within herself to go home. All of this is by way of saying that Deus is only half the equation. As important as the God it delivers is the Machina itself, a device that from the time of Euripides was visibly human-made. Historical accounts of Euripides' famous stage crane describe a conglomeration of levers and ropes and pulleys. It was as if Euripides had gone out of his way to assert the human factor in the device that made the god's appearance possible, creating a powerful sense of human participation in the very moments that seemed most divine. And so it has been with our arch. While it stands primarily as a symbol of global unity around moral beliefs, it also represents a technical achievement that underscores our human capacities for making ethical aspirations a reality. Machina, as much today as in Euripides' time, is man-made, putting responsibility for change ultimately in mankind's court. Mindful of these lessons, we decided 2 years ago to test the power of Deus Ex Machina to find a resolution to another international conflict. We set our sights on Britain's 200-year-old battle with Greece over possession of the so-called Elgin marbles, a collection of sculptures chiseled from the facade of the Parthenon by Lord Elgin early in the 1800s. This time, however, rather than placing our emphasis on Deus, on the moral dimension of the dispute, we determined to place the primary focus on the machina, on the role of human ingenuity to produce a fair outcome for all stakeholders. Against this backdrop, and working closely with the wonderful Greek ambassador Ioannis Raptakis, we announced on January 28, 2022, the IDA's plan to recreate the Parthenon sculptures, allowing the British Museum to send the originals back to Greece. Our copies, made of the same rare Pentelic marble used by Phidias, would be carved with a degree of accuracy that exceeded the limits of human visual acuity. They would be exact duplicates. We proposed beginning with a proof of concept object, the famous Selina horse. It would be machina at its very best. The media response was resounding. The story was picked up by all the UK national dailies and virtually every print and broadcast media source in Greece. Then, 2 weeks later, after 200 years of opposition to repatriation, the London Times ran a full-page article on the project together with an editorial, the lead editorial that day, strongly endorsing our reconstruction plan as the solution to the Elgin dispute. The Times pointed out how these very special copies were ideally suited to helping the British Museum discharge its public mission, teaching visitors about the history and aesthetics of ancient Greece. However, just like with the arch, we then faced the monumental task of actually producing what we had promised. While the British Museum did its level best to shut us down, denying us permission to scan the original sculpture, we forged ahead guerrilla style and by gum imaged Phidias' masterpiece from the gallery floor ourselves. After creating a detailed 3D model, we turned to our high-tech robot and a team of talented artisans for help. When Sir Simon Jenkins, former head of the UK National Trust, and I unveiled our Selina horse at London's Freud Museum, it was met with universal acclaim. A perfect copy, said the Times. The unveiling touched off another massive media firestorm on the day it was covered by both Greek and UK radio and television. In the weeks and months that followed, stories appeared and broadcast in social media around the world. The BBC World Service and multiple European TV networks aired in-depth features. The New York Times ran a 2,000-word front-page article in its Science Times. The Washington Post ran a full-page article of its own. ABC produced a documentary about the project starring Stephen Fry. Cover stories in Smithsonian and National Geographic followed. Once again, the massive media response led to real-world impacts, and that's the important point. Our project was favorably debated in Britain's House of Lords. Poll numbers swung wildly on the back of the intense media coverage, with 80% of Britons suddenly favoring repatriation. After centuries of stalemate, the Greeks and the British finally agreed to talks. A few months later, British Museum Chairman and former UK Chancellor George Osborne dramatically announced that there is a deal to be done, words the Greeks and many like-minded Britons had hoped to hear for 2 centuries. Then, just this week, after a number of UK newspapers published the IDA's plan for a brand new legal approach to repatriation, it was announced that the UK's Prime Minister, for the first time, is finally ready to resolve the dispute over the marbles. I can tell you, and you're the first to hear that next week, the Culture Minister in England and the Culture Minister, Ms. Mendoni, here in Greece, will meet to discuss a solution to the Elgin conflict. At long last, a solution is at hand. While the outward reactions to these 2 initiatives were similar, I suppose, vigorous public engagement leading to positive political progress, the Parthenon and Palmyra projects were, in important ways, quite different. The arch spoke for itself. It was the visible reincarnation of a treasured object that brought hope and optimism to the victims of cultural cleansing worldwide. In all of the spaces in which it stood, from New York to London to Dubai, it created, in Benedict's words, room for the presence of God to encourage us to act as we believe he might. World leaders stood under the arch and vowed to do the right thing. Displaced Syrian men and women traveled enormous distances to linger in its presence. The example of the arch inspired others to undertake similar ventures, multiplying its impact exponentially. It was, in short, Deus. The recreated marbles were something different. Virtually every news story, every documentary about that project focused on the charismatic robots that helped us achieve perfection in the Pentelic copies that we produce. The emphasis on the extraordinary science and engineering on which the project relied, all of it the product of human ingenuity, underscored mankind's power to fix his own problems. We were not looking beyond ourselves to the example of the gods, but to ourselves for solutions that men and women had within themselves to produce. It was the best of Machina. Together, these two projects were, in every sense, a tale of two cities. America's greatest architect, Frank Lloyd Wright, once said something like this: every good idea is capable of being expressed in many physical forms. The better the idea, the greater the variety of potential forms. The value of the builder to society and to the future lies in his capacity to find the ideal form in which to express an idea. It is a skill that comes faster with each new experience until the builder becomes master of the ideas he would express. After a decade of converting ideas into objects, I agree wholeheartedly with Mr. Wright. The titanic success of our two marquee projects can only be attributed to having somehow found the perfect forms for expressing good ideas. Our arch became a magnetic gathering place for people whose support converted the aspirations it represented into reality. And no object could have made the point more strongly than our perfect Pentelic horse that original material is not the only way to communicate history and aesthetics. In both cases, as Michelangelo famously said, we saw the angel in the marble and we set it free. I hope someday we'll be blessed to do it all over again. What form such a future project might take, I could not possibly say. All I know for sure is that, true to the tradition of Deus Ex Machina, whatever we produce, all of us working together, will be sudden and unexpected, and it will make its presence felt. I encourage each of you to find the ideal forms for expressing your own good ideas. When you do, I promise you will change the world. Thank you.